So here we are in the MakeCode online interface that we use to code our MicroBit. And first thing that we notice is that it's very user-friendly. We have up here in the top left-hand corner an image of a MicroBit. And the neat thing about this image is that it's actually interactive. It connects with the code that you're actually making in your workspace here. And the neat thing is that we can actually test our code by using this MicroBit over here. So let's say, for example, we were to build a code that said whenever the A button is pressed, do this. And once we've created that code and we want to test it, we can just go over here to this MicroBit and see what happens when we press our A button. And if whatever we see here is what we've coded here, then we can sort of say, yeah, everything works out. Or if there's a mistake in it, then we can actually debug on the screen here before we actually plug in our MicroBit and download the code to it. So that's kind of neat. The other thing we noticed too is that the MakeCode interface starts out as a drag and drop interface with blocks. So we have our middle section here with all of the different categories of different types of blocks all sort of grouped together here. And essentially, because it's drag and drop, it's the same sort of thing as Scratch or anything like that, where we select a block from these sort of areas here, drag it into our workspace, and build our code that way. So let's sort of think about the challenge that we have here, where we're trying to program our MicroBit to respond whenever it's shaken, and actually use that as an input that registers and actually counts the number of steps that we are taking, right? So the first thing we need to do is to go into our input section. This is all sort of relating to different events that can take place, and we can sort of identify what happens when those events happen. So here we have a block that says on shake. And basically what we're saying with this block is that whenever the MicroBit is shaken, we want something to happen. Now, in this case, we want it to count up by 1 and refer to that as our steps. And if we were to look through all of these sections, we wouldn't find anything that refers to steps. So we actually have to create a variable, and we have to call it steps. You can see here that I've actually created it already in this. Normally we wouldn't see steps and it would just say item. Item is always the go-to sort of name for our variables in this interface. So what we'd have to do if we didn't have steps there is click on item, drag it into the workspace here, click on this down arrow, and rename our variable. And in this section we would name it steps and press OK. I won't press OK because I've already created steps. I'm just going to click on the drop down here and select steps. And what we want to do is basically go back into our variables and say whenever our device is shaken, we want to change steps by 1. So what this is saying is that every time that the MicroBit is shaken, we want to change our variable that we've called steps by 1. Now, so that's going to happen. We have that happening, but we also want to be able to see these steps taking place, right? So we're going to go back into our input and we're going to do the on A button pressed. We want our A button to help us see how many steps we've taken. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's go back into our variables and we're going to select our steps variable again, and on A button, let's go into our basic, we want to show the number steps. So what this is saying, we have on shake, change our steps by 1. So it's going to keep adding 1 every time that it gets shaken. What we're also adding in here is that whenever A button is pressed, we want to show that number of steps that's being tallied as we go. Now the other thing we want to do is, let's say we're done and we want to start over again. We need to have a reset here. So if we go back into our input, we can click on this block again, and we're going to click on the drop down arrow And here you can see we can choose A, B, or AB at the same time. We're going to have this as our reset option. So what we want to do is go back into our variable, and we want to select the set item or set variable to, and we're going to select the steps variable. And we're going to say whenever A and B buttons are pressed at the same time, we want to reset our steps variable to the original 0 value. So then we have all three of these functions happening at the same time here, where it's constantly keeping track of our steps. It's always waiting for us to press A to display that number of steps, and it's also waiting for us to press A and B to reset our steps to 0. Now, this is pretty much our step counter, but Gracie and I have an extra bit of hardware here. We actually have a buzzer, and we thought it would be really cool to set a goal for ourselves. And so Gracie wanted to set a goal of 100 steps for the day. And so we wanted to make sure, we want to see if we can actually have our MicroBit sort of signal to us that we've achieved that goal, or she has. And so we thought, well, why don't we have it make a noise? So the first thing we're going to do is actually create, let's go in here to our forever loop, because we want this to happen at a forever.